Jane had the same routine every evening. She'd come back from work, cook herself some dinner, and wait for her cat Spike to come home from roaming the neighborhood all day. She adopted Spike when he was a little kitten and grew up to be a cat who loved to be outside as much as possible. Every evening he'd come home to eat some dinner and rest. This evening he did the same, but Jane noticed a strange piece of paper clipped to his collar. When she saw what the note said, she immediately turned pale and felt sick. This couldn't be true. Jane's heart raced as she reached out her hands and took the note from her cat's collar. The note was folded up tightly, and Jane wondered what it could be. Maybe someone had a complaint about her cat? Or could it be something entirely different? She was about to find out. Jane opened the note with trembling hands. It took a second for her to realize what she had just read, but when it all sank in, she gasped. It baffled her how anyone could write such sick and disturbing thoughts about a perfectly normal cat. But this was clearly not the end. The note wasn't just about Jane's cat. It was also addressed to her directly. And what this person threatened her with was even worse than what they wrote about her cat. Jane had all the reason to fear for her own safety. But who clipped the note around Jane's cat? What did the note say? And what will Jane do about it? Before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Jane's cat, Spike, loved going outside. He would usually go to the park and not come back until it was dinner time. Jane never worried about her cat, as she lived in a quiet neighborhood. Or so she thought, because, unfortunately, there was someone else in the park who had been keeping an eye on Spike. Each and every morning, this stranger came closer to Spike. He wanted to gain Spike's trust, for whatever reason. But Spike had no interest in strangers at all, let alone one who was plotting something. The stranger needed time to gain his trust, and, unfortunately, there was plenty of time. One morning, when Spike was drinking from the fountain, causing him to be less alert, the stranger grabbed Spike. The poor cat tried resisting, but the stranger had a firm grip. No one in the park seemed to bat an eye, and when Spike recognized the stranger, he calmed down. This was the start of all that would follow. Although without a note, Spike came home as a completely different cat. Jane didn't notice at first, as she had a long day at work. Then she put down his food, just before bedtime. Jane waited for Spike to come, and when he finally did, Jane realized something was terribly off about him. For starters, Spike didn't eat a thing. Usually, he couldn't get enough of his food. But this time, he wouldn't even come close to his bin. Jane decides to let it go for now, as she has to get ready for bed. But it wouldn't take long before she'd notice even more changes. Usually, Spike would follow her to bed. He would lay himself down right next to her, satisfied and done for the day. But he doesn't follow her this time. He's distant and even hostile when Jane tries to pick him up. Jane goes to bed anyway, but tells herself to watch Spike closely in the following days. The next day, Jane is at work and opens her social media. On one of the local cat pages, she sees a video of a cat grabbing and catching a bird at the park. The person posting this video calls the owner to come to get their cat. She looks again, but this time a little closer. Jane realizes something. Wouldn't you know it, it's Spike. Jane doesn't know what she's seeing. She never saw him behave like this. After his strange behavior from the day before, and now this video, Jane knows something has to change. She decides to follow Spike for a day. This would lead to a confrontation. Jane tells her boss that she won't be working the next day due to personal reasons. Luckily, her boss agrees without making a big deal of it. Jane leaves work that day feeling restless and she had all the reason to feel that way. Spike comes home that night, far later than usual. He is once more behaving distantly, avoiding contact with Jane and not eating a thing. Jane looks at the cat page from earlier that day and is relieved to see no extra posts about Spike's behavior. Then, she looks at the comments of the video from Spike grabbing a bird. Jane turns pale. Someone with a completely dark profile picture, commenting with clearly a code name, comments, "Don't worry, I know this cat. It's practically mine. He's doing as he's told. Don't go near him." Jane is lost for words. Who could this be? What could he possibly mean by this? And what were his intentions? Jane tries to ease her mind but barely manages to do so. Sure, she adopted the cat at a young age, but that was years ago. Could this be the former owner? Was he aware of who she was and where she lived? And most importantly, what were his plans with Spike? A little note around Spike's collar, only a little while later, would explain it all. Jane decides to report the profile and asks the page owner to delete the comment. Luckily, there were other members of the page that corrected the strange man. Jane goes to bed, determined to follow Spike the next day to end this for once and all. The next morning, Jane decides to keep the same morning routine as when she goes to work. She pretends to leave for work in order to make Spike leave the house after her. She hides around the corner of her house, and surely enough, Spike leaves. He moves very fast as Jane tries to keep up. He seems determined. Where could he be going? And just before the park, Jane loses track of him as he crosses the road while she's waiting for the traffic light to turn green. She decides to look for him in the park, but there are so many bushes, people, and other animals that it seems pointless. Looking back, she should have looked at the fountain right away. Perhaps she could have stopped the stranger. Jane returns home without her beloved Spike. She feels terribly down. She is worried about Spike, how and if he will return. Directly after coming home, she opens all the cat pages that she knows, looking for something about Spike. She even considers posting a message herself, asking for help. Minutes later, she decides to post a call for help. She asks the members whether they saw Spike or know anything about him. In the meantime, it's getting dark outside. In better times, Spike would return around this hour. Jane waits in front of the kitchen window, nervous like never before. Finally, Spike returns, but with a note around his collar. Jane doesn't believe her eyes. Spike is acting strange once again. He's keeping his distance from Jane, hissing at her when she comes closer. Yet, Jane desperately tries to get closer to him, to get the note. She had all the reason to hurry, but Jane was prepared. She bought Spike's favorite snacks to lure him into getting closer to her. It slowly starts working. "You'd be better off returning the cat to me. Only then he'll become the predator he really is inside. Bring him to me, and I shall reward you." Jane feels sick to her stomach. Who was this? How did he know Spike? And what did he do to her poor cat? Posting the note. What to do? No. Jane suspects the police not to take this seriously at all, and who else could help her? Perhaps the online community? Jane decides to post the note right away. She asks the members for help and warns them as well. Luckily, Jane received a comment. That would change everything. One of the members recognized the handwriting and identified him as an animal stalker. He's a known figure at the police and is picked up right after. He's forbidden to go to the park from there on. Jane is relieved from her worries and showers Spike with love. He is back to his old ways in just a few days.